Solution overview. We'll talk now about the different types of products that you can use and getting prepared on how to implement your ENS implementation. In this module, we're going to look at the whole overall solution and the key features of this solution. What are the new features and enhancements for the release of this ENS product? The different components that are involved in the basic deployment architecture, and how the overall solution works together. In today's challenge, the fact that we have all these targeted attacks are just huge. You know, the attackers no longer are just malicious little people that want to say, oh, let me see if I can create a little worm and have it wreak havoc, and let me see if people put it all in the newspaper. Now, what it is people are just trying to steal our information, bring the company down, have some ransomware to gain some money, and of course the idea is we have these targeted attacks. Everything is complex and is constantly changing out there. We have the lack of visibility so to be able to assist you in recovery. And then of course the different performance problems that you have, and that makes it very hard to track what's going on. Is it an attack, or is it just something going on with your machine? The McAfee Endpoint Security is a totally modular and integrated product that basically we have where you could have the threat prevention protection, you can add on the web security, and then you can also utilize the firewall. The nice thing about it is this is all managed from EPO, and you could use the cloud EPO server or the on-premise. It is an open and extensible security framework. We have forensic ability to look at the threats and what is contained in those different threats and what language is in. And then the migration is very seamless to help you actually migrate from your previous version of the products into this particular one, such as VirusScan being integrated into the ENS product. The key features of this ENS product is the fact that, as I mentioned before, for our management, you can use the on-premise EPO server, you can use the EPO cloud, and you also have the ability to do the standalone management. Obviously, standalone management is not one that you really are working for, because that would mean SneakerNet, and I'd have to walk from machine to machine to machine. But we do have the centralized management. The threat prevention module is what would, first off, take over what we used to use that had to do with the VirusScan Enterprise. So you have your on-access scan, your on-demand scan, my unwanted programs, all that. You have all those features. We also now have, with this particular version, is we now have the host intrusion prevention signatures. You'll see that we go into more depth about that later on. And along with the host intrusion prevention, we have the GTI capabilities that we can go in and know whether or not this is malicious or not utilizing McAfee's GTI. The firewall, we have that. It's another module that you can add. And that is the normal idea with a firewall, that the firewall has where I'm going to prevent communication to and from a computer, such as, HTTP, DNS, whatever you want. So it's totally the same thing as what you would have with host intrusion prevention firewall. And also it has the GTI capabilities. The web control module used to be the site advisor, and this is the one where I can actually prevent people from going to certain websites that have to do with certain categories, like inappropriate websites having to do with porn sites. And along with that, we also have the fact that we can utilize the GTI to say, well, if this site has this type of rating, I don't want you to let the people to go there. Our new anti-malware engine core, that we call it AM core, that has a built-in intelligence strategy that you'll see later on. We have let McAfee decide, that will give you a lot better performance on your computers, because you won't scan all the files. you'll only scan files that are the type of files that could have malicious activity or malicious infections or whatever, instead of me scanning a file that maybe is just a Windows executable. Along with this, we have the migration tool. The migration tool helps us migrate pre-existing policies, such as the virus scan policies, the virus scan task, host intrusion prevention policies, firewall policies, all of those, and SiteAdvisor. This tool is what you can use to migrate those policies over and put them into a new ENS policy without you having to configure everything from scratch. Along with this product, you have our optional adaptive threat protection module that helps you integrate with our McAfee Data Exchange Layer, the DXL, and the McAfee Threat Intelligence Exchange, our TIE solution. Basically, these features are separate and purchased differently. A list of what's new and enhanced for this release, first off, is we do have some enhancements for the adaptive threat protection, which with this particular feature, we have our dynamic application containment, which you'll see later on, we'll talk about this, that will contain files that they can run only in certain folders or access certain registry entries to prevent you from having a particular executable access files outside of its normal area, and this would help even like with the ransomware. We also have the Real Protect scanner that has a self-learning to help you also detect if it's malware that's in that 0-day, which is between when it's released and we detect it. We used to call this the threat intelligence, and it's now called threat protection. Anyway, just to remind you, this is not supported on the McAfee EPO cloud. Some other enhancements that has to do with the endpoint migration assistant is the fact that we can migrate for a whole group or the entire system tree when you're doing your policies. You can also now migrate server and workstation settings. And if you were saying, well, what are you talking about? Well, that has to do with the fact that with virus scan, you always had two sides to every policy. You had a workstation side and a server side. Our previous version of the migration tool, you would do the workstation side, and then you would go back and then you would do the server side. You can still do that with this particular version, but you also have another option where you can say, I want you to migrate both the server and workstation at the same time. Along with this is not only that, you can migrate the firewall trusted applications that we had with host intrusion prevention. And then with this one, because now we have the HIP signatures added, is you can also migrate any of the custom signatures that you had written in the host intrusion prevention. The firewall enhancements, now we have the fact that we support the HTTPS protocol to determine can you reach that domain or not. Other enhancements for the threat prevention is the fact that we can actually say what is the registry scan location we want when you're doing on-demand scan. We also have a access protection rule that protects Windows services. And as I mentioned to you before, we now have what we call exploit prevention signatures, which were the old host intrusion prevention signatures, and application protection rules, that some of those signatures are now in the application protection rules. Along with this, we also have this new false positive mitigation events query to let you see what are some false positive mitigation events that might have happened. Another enhancement that we have for the web control is the 64-bit Firefox browser support. This is the first of 3 tables that gives you the listing of what capability we had in the previous host intrusion prevention product and what is this comparison with which version of ENS. So if you'll notice, we have the access protection support for files and registries. You have that with all 3 versions. The access protection support for processes signatures comes with ENS 10.2 and 10.5. You'll see also the support for the services signatures for access protection that came with ENS 10.5. We had the generic buffer overflow protection for 32-bit applications across all products. You also had the suspicious caller and caller validation support across all versions. The host IPS API, we have support for that across all 4 versions. The content update support for exploit prevention signatures, that has nothing to do with access protection. We have the support for that. And a new feature, that the data execution protection, we did not have that for host intrusion prevention, but we do have that for all versions of the ENS. Our second table, if you'll notice, the supervisor mode execution protection, we did not have that in host intrusion prevention, but that's a new feature that's enabled for all versions of ENS. The support for the generic privilege escalation protection, we did not have that in the first version of ENS, but that's supported now. The basic memory protection management, we had support for that. Custom IPS rules, which is the standard mode, we have that. It's now in the access protection of the ENS. So we do not have custom rules in the signatures. Setting the block and report actions, adding the exclusions that has to do with the signatures, we have that in all versions of the products. Setting if you want to block or report or add exclusions for the exploit prevention signatures, that was a feature in host intrusion prevention, and that is a new feature in ENS 10.5. Support for high, medium, low informational signatures for their severity, along with disabled, is also a part of ENS 10.5. And exclusions by the hash path, the certificate in the process, we can have that also in ENS 10.2 and 10.5. That we had an ability to modify our different monitored processes. We now have that in ENS 10.5. It was in HIPS. Be able to set the reactions at a per signature level. It's a little different in ENS than it is in host intrusion prevention. You'll see that. Also the exclusions, we can set that in ENS 10.5. The event aggregator, that still is only in host intrusion prevention 8. It has to do with the fact that we could do a consolidated view of all the HIPS events. And you could go in and create exclusions with those events. We cannot create exclusions for the events now with the ENS 10.5. Creating custom IPS in the exploit prevention rules, we do not have that. What you'll do is you'll create custom IPS rules in the access protection. But we do not have the expert mode in the access protection and exploit prevention in ENS. The content update support for access protection signatures, that is not supported yet. And we do not have the signatures for Microsoft SQL Server, the web servers, and our network IPS signatures. That support does not exist just yet. The architecture of the ENS product is, if you'll notice, basically what we have here is you've got the McAfee agent, and the McAfee agent is what manages all the communication between the EPO server or your agent handler and the product. It's also what enforces the policies. It's also what collects the events and sends them back to your EPO server / agent handler. The client user interface is what you can look at locally on the particular machine to see what the settings are, or look at, you can even run on-demand scans and do any updates. But then what we have is you have your modular features. So you have the threat prevention feature, you have the firewall, you have the web control, we have the adaptive protection and the active response. And everything that works along with this is all the different common components, like GTI, the scheduler, like when are you going to run an on-demand scan, when do you do your data updates. And then we have all the different drivers that runs underneath that has to do with the network drivers, so that I can have my firewall policies, the file level drivers, so that I know that I can scan those files and our access control. Just to talk again about the different types of management platforms, the EPO on-premise is the one that our customers, they download it, they install it, they set up the server, they have their own SQL server, and basically they can maintain and manage this server. You do have to have a certain expertise to manage this, patch it, update it, set up your different distributed repositories, your user accounts, and so on. The cloud is basically where McAfee owns it. McAfee will help manage it. And what you'll have is the fact that the customers will log into the cloud EPO server and look at everything, configure the policies, but they don't have to have the whole cost of maintaining the server itself. You cannot create any of your own repositories, but there you go. The self-managed is the standalone. Once again, the standalone is where you're going to go around and walk around from machine to machine and configure it manually. You do not have the EPO server. Where it says the McAfee agent is required, McAfee agent is actually built into the product. It just does not talk to an EPO server. The threat prevention module feature actually has several main features to this module. You have the malware scanning, our threat detection, and quarantine. You're going to see how we can quarantine the different files. The on-access scanner is where it scans the files when you access it. So when the person is sitting there doing their job and they're clicking around or opening documents, anything like that, it's scanning the files in real time. The on-demand scan is where you can go in and create a scan that goes and scans a specific area of the machine at a specific scheduled time. You can have it where it scans just a certain registry, it scans what's resident in the memory. It just depends on what your needs are. The threat detection has to do with how do I want you to react when you do detect the threat. Do you want to try to clean it first and then delete it, or do you want me just to delete it? And we're going to talk about this much later on. Now the quarantine, what you have is when we say try to clean it, if you cannot clean it, then delete it, what it actually does is it puts it in a folder called quarantine that you can actually say where you want that quarantine folder to be. And what you can do is you can go back and you can look at that quarantine folder and you can delete the files right then. You can try to restore them. If it's possible, you can rescan it, or I can get more information about that. And we'll talk in more detail later on. The firewall module is a stateful firewall. We'll talk a lot about this when we get to the firewall module. But basically it looks at all the traffic that's coming to and from your computer. And what it will do is you will have your set of rules. It has to do with your policy, and you'll say, how do I want you to react? Do you want to allow? Do you want to deny? And basically you could prevent people from going to using something like FTP in your network. You also have where we can organize the rules. We put them in rule groups. And then one of the other nice features we have is location-aware firewall groups and firewall rules. And with that, you'll see later on that I can have a set rule group that says what are the firewall rules if you're on the company network, and then what are the rules if you're not on the company network. The web control module, which was originally called Site Advisor, it will utilize our GTI, where you can get a rating, so I can actually identify, is this a appropriate site or not? So what you have, you'll see later on, is where I can go in and actually block people from going to websites if it has a certain rating. Okay. We also have this little color coding where you'll see green, yellow, red, gray, black. And so what happens is they can actually see that it's a green site, so they can go to that site. You also have some reports that you'll get on your EPO server, so I can see what the ratings are and get all the detail about that. We also have where I can do some protection saying, well, if it's a specific category, you cannot go to that particular website. And then we have some logging along with that. Now, what it also does is it integrates with the threat prevention module so that you can have the scanning of any files that are downloaded. Now, technically, I know people may say, well, you have where the threat prevention module is going to scan anyway because it isn't the on-access scanner. Yeah, but it's a little different because it actually is scanning as it's being downloaded. And you can change this if you want. The Adaptive Threat Protection module is the feature that allows for the dynamic application containment. You're going to see that we have some predefined rules that you will be able to use for this. We can also exclude safe applications so that those can run normally and you have better performance. And then it also integrates with our TIE and DXL so that basically if one machine finds a threat, communicates with TIE, TIE says yes, it is a threat. It can now tell all the machines out there on your network that has the DXL installed on it that they all have that particular file, and they can know immediately what is going on, and they can mitigate the problem by deleting that file if that's what your configuration is. The layered approach of how this product works is, first off, what you have is I can go in and whitelist files. One, the product can whitelist it. You can say, well, I've already scanned this file, it's safe, so then I don't have to have it where I need to scan it again and again. You can also have certain types of files that has to do with, like, let's say Microsoft. So if you have that the Microsoft installer is a trusted executable, then basically when that runs its installation, all the files that installer is doing are trusted. Okay? But if we have not scanned the installer, or maybe it's suspicious, then what will happen is it will scan everything. You also have the ability to have a trusted certificate, and the signing of that certificate will be cached, and it will be in the cache until it gets updated. Otherwise, even if I reboot the system, it'll still be in the cache. And so the idea is the fact that, do I need to scan when it's a whitelisted that has been trusted by that certificate, or it's a trusted process? No, you do not. And so basically you have a better performance. The content files has to do with our AM core. We also call them malware signatures, exploit prevention content. It has lots of different names like DATs. Basically that all works with the scanning engine to say, what do you need to do when you see this particular file? How do I identify and handle that threat? It will detect the threats quickly by looking out to the cloud and giving the information about it, and it knows what's blacklisted and what's whitelisted. So instead of using the traditional type of techniques of the DATs, we can go beyond the DATs and look at it like the overall behavior, and it helps to prevent against false positives. Then you have the McAfee GTI. The McAfee GTI is where we're communicating out to our GTI server. You upload the hash of the file. We look at it. You get this instantaneous response back as to whether or not it has to do that file is malicious or not. Now our TIE, that level is where we also optimize the threat detection and response by closing that little gap between the encounter of the malware from days, weeks, months, down to milliseconds. So the idea previously, like with VirusScan, is I had a machine that it may detect a malicious file. It talks to GTI. It gets a response back. It then performs whatever GTI has told it. Hey, GTI says yes, it's malicious, and you have it configured to delete. It does that. But what about all my other VirusScan machines? Well, they start detecting it, so they're all having to communicate with GTI. With TIE, all it takes is for one machine to talk to TIE, and then it comes back with that information and says, you have to have, hey, everybody, we've determined that this file is malicious, and basically they're all taken care of together. The dynamic application containment, the real protect, is where we also have where I can protect you against unknown applications and prevent them from doing any malicious behavior. Now the Real Protect really goes beyond our normal static analysis. By what it does is it looks at that dynamic behavior and it says this malware is trying to do something that is going to try to hide in my file system. It's going to do any type of malicious activity, and so we can actually prevent that. And then the post execution has to do with any behavioral features or memory analysis that is going on within the memory of my product. The Migration Assistant, this is a little quick overview, but just so you know, you have to add this extension separately, and the Migration Assistant will migrate everything having to do with the firewall and the general policies that had to do with host intrusion prevention, the IPS catalog that has to do with the host intrusion prevention, and along with now our IPS rules. If you have any Mac products, we can migrate the endpoint protection for Mac and also the virus scan for Mac. The Site Advisor, it can migrate the client tasks and the policies of Site Advisor, and also migrate the client tasks and your server and workstation policies of Virus Scan Enterprise. Other McAfee products that ENS can integrate with has to do with our McAfee Active Response, normally called MAR, our Active Threat Defense, the ATD product. As I mentioned to you before, the Data Exchange Layer, the DXL, and also our Threat Intelligence Exchange, TIE. Again, EPO is a part of the mix, and the GTI is a part of the mix. But one other feature that we have is our Enterprise Security Manager, the ESM product, so that you can actually pull reporting up that has to do with all the events and the logging of your systems. Which ENS module acts as a filter between the computer and the network or internet? Is it the firewall, threat prevention, adaptive threat protection, or web control? So if you said the firewall, you are correct. Check your understanding. McAfee, DXL, and TIE are included automatically with the ENS Adaptive Threat Protection module. True or false? Well, if you said false, then you are correct. To check your understanding, which ENS module provides features formerly found in Virus Scan Enterprise? Is it the firewall, threat prevention, adaptive threat protection, or the web control? If you said B, threat prevention, you are correct. In review of this module, we want to remind you ENS supports both decentralized and standalone management. The EPO support gives you the ability to use the on-premise EPO or the EPO cloud, which is managed by McAfee. The key features that has to do with the ENS product is the threat control, which has the virus scan enterprise capabilities, the firewall, which had to do with our host intrusion prevention firewall capabilities, and the web control, which had our GTI and the Site Advisor capabilities. The adaptive threat protection, that's a module that you can add to leverage our DXL and TIE for you to have context-aware adaptive security, but you do have to buy those separately. You can configure the policies using the ENS client, but ideally what you want to do is you want to use the policies that you configure on EPO, and those policies will overwrite the configuration that you've had configured locally. And this concludes the module on the solution overview.